Welcome. I want to begin by introducing myself. So I'm Kate. And before we go any further, I want you to take a big, deep breath, holding at the top and then slowly letting it out, letting your body arrive here, settling in, taking slow, deep breaths as we really start to dive into this conversation. So this conversation is for women and men, if you are here, who are already functional, self-aware, and capable, whose lives look fine on the outside, but they don't yet reflect the depth of who they are or who they know themselves to be, who their healing enabled them to become. And I want to say this clearly. If you're early in your healing journey, this probably isn't the right place to start. This work is for women and men who already know who they are and are trying to understand why their life hasn't caught up to this yet. They are trying to piece together the puzzles as to say why I have so much inner awareness, but my life isn't reflecting this. This is not for women and men who are searching for who they are. This is for the woman who knows, and you've always known you're meant for a bigger life. And this is not in a delusional way, not in a bypassing way, but in a grounded, not like an inner knowing kind of way. Of course, what you're asking is possible because you have already seen her. You've felt her, you've touched her in moments of clarity, in your ceremonies, in your journal, and in your visions, and in your quiet, introspective moments. You already know the relationships you want, the scale of your life, your creativity, the leadership that you want to dive into, a life that actually fits the depth of who you are and the amount of inner work that you've done. That knowing has never been the problem. The problem is, or where the confusion is that you're not living it and you don't understand why. Because you're not lazy, you're not confused, and you're not unmotivated. And it's not because you haven't tried. I know you are a capable person. You are self-aware. You've done the work. You understand yourself at an intimate level. You have processed the past. And you have the language and the insight and the awareness. And I can't talk into this enough. You've done it all. Yet, whenever you try and move, like really move, when something requires you to take up more space, more visibility, more truth, when you try and step forth into this life, tell the truth, receive more, or step into the job, the role, like everything that you have ever dreamed of, something in you tightens. Usually not in a dramatic way. It's not loud, but it's enough to really slow you down. Sometimes you do crash though. It's enough to make you hesitate and question yourself. And that old self-doubt comes back in, and that old self-confidence comes back in. It's enough to keep you slightly smaller, or sometimes a lot smaller than your inner knowing. And this is the phase almost no one names properly or explains how to get out of it. Part 1, what's actually happening? The reality, not the theory. Before we go any further, I want to be very clear about something. What's happening here is not one single problem. And it's not accurate or helpful to try and reduce this phase to a single cause. Because for most women, or for most people who find themselves here, several things are happening all at the same time. This is why this phase feels really confusing and really exhausting. And that's why you feel like you're out of options, even though you are so deeply self-aware. What I'm about to name are not diagnoses, they're not labels, and they're not personality flaws. What is happening here and what I'm going to be speaking into are overlapping dynamics that tend to emerge at this stage of development, especially for women who have already done a significant amount of healing. Okay, so the first one here is you're often waiting to feel ready, waiting for the click. But readiness no longer works in the ways that it used to. There are moments where you genuinely believe you still need to find one more missing piece, one more insight. You need one more round of healing. You might need to find that capital T trauma, which explains what's happening. One more nervous system breakthrough. So what happens is you wait. Not because you don't want to live the life you want to live, but because you are being thorough, conscientious, responsible, and self-aware. And early on in your journey, this strategy worked. It's why you got so far. Preparation led to change. Insight, awareness led to relief. But this phase is different because this phase is not about preparation. It's about capacity building while you're moving. And readiness doesn't arrive in advance anymore. It emerges inside action. So if you're waiting to feel fully ready before you move, unfortunately, you are going to be waiting a fairly long time. Waiting indefinitely. Not because there's anything wrong and you haven't not finished your healing, or you're not because you haven't done enough healing, but because your system is being asked now to learn through experiences, not more healing and not contemplation. Which brings me to the second point. Healing has quietly become a place to retreat to. Not because anything is wrong with it, but because it feels safer or feels safe. And this is an uncomfortable one, but it really truly matters. For many post-healing women, healing itself becomes a place that you keep returning to when life demands movement. I don't think it's a conscious decision. It's not manipulative. It's just functional. It worked and it makes you feel productive. And as long as you're working on yourself, you don't actually have to fully step forward. You don't have to risk being seen. And you don't have to find out whether you can actually hold the life you've been dreaming of. Healing becomes familiar. It's contained and private. And your life stays hypothetical. And again, this doesn't mean healing was a mistake. It means it did its job. And now you have outgrown it as a primary orientation. But without a new developmental container, the nervous system always defaults back to what it knows. Number 3, your nervous system may already be operating at capacity, even if you look fine on the outside. And this part is rarely acknowledged. For many women who've done years of inner work are already living with chronic elevated stress responses, high cortisol, adrenal fatigue, and your systems are braced just managing daily life. Bodies that are just coping, and they are not resourced. They do not have anything else to give. So when you keep asking that system to hold more, hold more visibility, more leadership, more responsibility, more money, and more intimacy. But your nervous system does not experience this as expansion. It experiences it as overload. And this is why you have to slow down or pull back, or it shuts you down without your permission. It's why you get sick every time you try and up-level your life. And again, it's not because the future you're calling in is wrong in any way, but because the present doesn't yet feel safe enough to support extra, more. And this is where we come back to, it's not a mindset issue. It's this capacity issue, capacity to hold the life you want. Okay, and number 4, underneath all of this, survival is still holding internal authority. This is the thread that ties all of this information together. What is rarely understood is, even after healing, survival often remains the decision maker in your life. Not loudly, not reactively, quietly. It's the one saying, not yet. That looks too risky. Let's not push past what we already know is familiar. Let's stay safe. Survival isn't interested in your potential. Sorry. It's interested in predictability. And when survival holds authority, it doesn't matter how much you know about who you are or the life you want to call in. Because identity, your new identity, doesn't stabilize through awareness or insight. It stabilizes through lived experiences under pressure. And when you layer or stack all of this waiting, retreating into healing, nervous system strain, survival authority, the thing is they don't cancel each other out. They compound. That's why this phase feels so heavy. Not dramatic heavy, not chaotic, but just dense. And why effort alone no longer works. Part 2. This is usually the moment people can't articulate, but feel intensely. You reach a point where you realize, I can't keep doing the same things and hoping for a different outcome. Healing used to work, but it's now not giving you the same experience as it used to. You've healed and you've regulated and you've processed. You have reflected and you really understand yourself. I can't say this enough. You have all of the language and the insight, and yet it's not translating into a lived experience. Your inner world has changed. Your awareness has expanded, but your life hasn't yet reorganized around this new identity or this new understanding of yourself. And it's so confusing because everything you were told to do, you did, and it once worked. What makes this moment so disorientating is that the advice you're still being given keeps pointing you back to the same places, to more healing, to more ceremonies, to more inner work, more regulation. But all that leads to is just managing yourself. And I really want to be clear here. Nothing is wrong with those tools. But no one ever explains what comes after the healing. So you keep going back, not really out of resistance, but because there's no other choice. There's no other direction. And I know you feel the mismatch. You can feel it. Something isn't working. This is not helping anymore. Because when you try to apply all of these old tools, nothing really shifts. The relief doesn't arrive anymore. Momentum doesn't stabilize. It doesn't move you in any direction. It just feels heavy. So you reach for a very specific realization. I cannot solve this from the same mind or the same body that created the problem. And I call this the Einstein moment, because it just hits you one day and you're like, not in a dramatic way, not in an explosive way, but in this unmistakable, unshakable feeling. You have reached the edge of what all of the healing tools can do. And that moment actually is quite terrifying, because you don't yet have the missing piece, the next step. And here's the part that is important to name clearly. Healing did not fail you. This is not a failing of healing. Actually, it's evidence that healing has done exactly what it was meant to do. Help bring the unconscious into the conscious. But now you have to live from there, because you're no longer unaware of who you are. You're awake. And you're no longer disconnected from yourself. So you have all of this understanding about who you are. Now you have to live it, because awareness alone does not reorganize a life. And this breaking point, the issue is no longer understanding. It's how you orientate yourself. Your nervous system is still organized around who you used to be, around survival. Even though your consciousness has moved on. So every attempt to expand from here feels so full of effort. And it triggers collapse or hesitation and sends you back into more analysis, instead of taking the action that's actually needed at this stage. Not because you're resistant, but because your nervous system is still running your decisions. Who you used to be. It hasn't been updated. And this is what most women don't have language for. They think they're blocked. They think they simply haven't done enough healing. But they've reached the limit of insight. And once you see this gap, you can't really unsee it, because this phase doesn't respond to more thinking. This phase requires a different developmental environment, one that works with the nervous system inside real life pressures. Not after the fact, not when we're back in contemplation, right in the moment of life getting loud. And that's why this point feels so final. You know at a cellular level that circling back to more healing isn't going to work anymore. And yet you haven't been shown what comes next or been given another option. Part 3, the real cost. And this is why you cannot ignore this phase. Here's what happens if you stay in this post-healing phase for too long. Every time you feel this pull to life, this natural pull to life, and then retreat, every time you sense that next step, that intuition, and then overanalyze it, every time you try and move towards the life you want and your nervous system crashes and pulls you back, your system learns very specifically that forward momentum is unsafe. Not because it is actually unsafe, but because it hasn't been supported. It hasn't been given new proof that it is safe. So your trust or your self-trust erodes. Not all at once, but quietly. You stop backing yourself or your intuition, your impulses. You stop trusting your desires, and you start negotiating with what you actually want. And something else begins to take hold. Fatigue, not just physical, existential. Healing fatigue, decision fatigue, life fatigue. Joy dulls. Desire just feels really heavy. And everything starts to feel like effort. Not because you're depressed, although it certainly probably feels like you're depressed, but because you're exhausted from holding yourself at this edge of life you can't actually find a way to step into. It's so painful. This is where numbness appears. And numbness is not because of a lack of gratitude. It's the cost of living below your actual capacity and your potential for too long. It's just so disheartening. It feels like heartbreak, actually, speaking from experience. And here's the part that really matters, and most people avoid naming clearly. This phase does not stay neutral. It calcifies. If nothing changes, your nervous system doesn't stay paused. It adapts to the retreat. It learns that pulling back is always the safest option. That shrinking is protection. That your desire, that perfect, amazing dream life that you want, is risky. Over time, that edge that once called you forward starts to feel so far away. That gap just keeps widening. And this is not for a lack of desire, but because wanting without movement just hurts. It just hurts. Everything just hurts. So you begin to want less. Your desires soften. Your visions become meh. You downregulate your dreams and you can keep telling yourself you're fine. Not because you actually are, but because you don't see a viable next step that doesn't come with collapse. And this is the real cost of staying here. Not failure, not breakdown, but this erosion. Quiet, gradual erosion. And it's invisible to everybody else. You just feel this muted experience of life. And this is why this phase requires intervention. Like, I'm really passionate about it. Not motivation, not another insight, and not another solo process. It needs support and structure. A container where your nervous system can learn in real time that forward momentum no longer equals danger. Because if you are watching this and you're recognizing yourself here, this isn't information anymore. It's directional. This is the moment where you either keep circling the same experience, keep circling the same inner work with diminishing results or diminishing returns. Step into a new developmental environment designed specifically for this phase. Not because you're broken, but because you're ready to stop paying the cost of staying here. You have already done all of the inner work. Now you need one more piece of the puzzle in order to start living from there. What integration actually is. Up until now, everything I've explained describes why this phase exists. This part is about what's actually missing. Because integration, or the word, gets thrown around a lot. And most of the time, it's rather vague. It's usually tacked on at the end of something. A ceremony, a healing session, a retreat. Make sure you integrate. And then everyone nods and says yes, and then goes home. But no one actually explains how to integrate, why integration matters, or what it practically looks like in real life. So when I talk about integration, I'm not talking about another phase of healing. Integration is the deliberate process of taking everything you learned in your healing, your insight, your awareness, your understandings of your unconscious patterns, the healing you've done, the clarity that you've gained, and start living from that place. Start living from that place. Not thinking about it, not understanding it more, but having it show up in how you make your decisions, how you speak, in how you move and how you parent, in how people should treat you, how you relate to everyday life. And this is where most people find themselves stuck. Not because they haven't healed, but because no one ever showed them how to integrate or how to make that shift livable. So I want to be very precise and in explaining what integration is. Integration, again, is not more healing. It's not more processing. And it's not more insight. And it's not regulation for the sake of feeling calmer. Integration is about what happens in the exact moment fear meets choice. Here's what I mean. There is a very specific moment where your life either changes or it doesn't change. It's not in your journal. It's not in a moment of reflection. It's not in the breakthrough. It's not after you've calmed down. Change happens in the moment where you know what you want to say or what boundary you want to hold, or you know the step that you want to take, or you're right on the edge of visibility, honesty, or more expansion, or posting the thing online, or receiving more money, and your body reacts. Your chest tightens, your thoughts speed up, you feel fear, you want to hesitate, you feel this sense of urgency, fog collapse, and the pull to retreat. That moment is where decisions are actually made, not intellectually, physiologically. Healing helps you understand why that reaction exists. But understanding does not automatically change what happens next. And this is the part where most people miss. Your nervous system does not reorganize through awareness or insight. It reorganizes through repeated, supported experiences, inside activation. When you feel the fear and do it anyway, exactly that. That's what integration is. Integration is the process of retraining your nervous system while the stakes are real, so that expansion no longer equals danger. Let me make this very clear or very concrete. You might find it easy to speak honestly with strangers, but completely different with people you love. Same truth, same words, different internal response. Your body isn't responding to the truth, it's responding to the anticipated consequences. Disappointment, rejection, withdrawal, loss of closeness. Your system learned at some point that honesty had a cost. So even though you know who you are now, your body will still react as if the old rules apply. And again, this is not a mindset issue. It's not actually resistance. It's capacity issue. Integration works right here. Not by pushing through this fear, not by waiting for it to disappear, and not retreating from it, not analyzing it, but supporting the nervous system while it is happening to stay present and to make a different decision or to choose differently in the moment it would normally pull back. And this is the difference. Healing happens largely in hindsight. Integration happens in real time. And this is why insight alone stops working at this stage. You already understand yourself. You already understand the patterns and your triggers and where it all comes from. You already know what you want. What you don't yet have is a system or a nervous system that can reliably hold this while you move. Integration is what shifts this internal authority from survival, quietly running your decisions in the background, to you being able to stay with yourself, your healed self, when expansion shows up. And when that authority shifts, something very specific starts to change. You stop crashing after growth. You stop negotiating with what you want. And you stop shrinking your life to stay safe. And this is not because fear is gone, because fear is no longer in charge. That's integration. And without it, healing keeps explaining your life without reorganizing it. Inside the integration method, we're not trying to eliminate fear. We're not trying to heal away. We are not asking you to override the body in order to grow. We work right at the point when most women lose traction. The moment expansion requires embodiment. The moment you're about to speak the new boundary, tell the truth, be seen, receive more, move towards life, the life you already know you want. And the thing is something inside you contracts, and that contraction isn't you. It isn't a flaw, but what it is a survival response trying to take the lead as you step towards who you want to be. Inside this work, we learn to recognize those responses in real time. Not as personality flaws, not as an identity, but as predictable patterns that will show up under pressure. Survival roles and survival identities are universal experiences. Some people fight, some people freeze, some people collapse, some people overfunction, some will disappear, some will self-sabotage. What matters isn't whether they exist, it's which ones run you and when. Because the moment you can recognize who is showing up, what is showing up, when it's actually happening, something fundamental shifts. Choice becomes available. Not theoretical choice, not the kind that you make in introspection in your journal later, once everything's settled down. Choice inside the moment, while your body is activated. When you can feel your nervous system get uncomfortable and the stakes are actually real. That's where integration actually happens. Not later, not once you've calmed down, not once you've talked yourself into courage, but in the exact moment your nervous system is deciding whether it's safer to move forward or pull back. Think about the difference between setting a boundary with a stranger versus setting a boundary with someone that you love. With a stranger, your body often stays relatively neutral. There's no history, there is no emotional consequences, no real risk of loss. However, with someone close to you, your chest tightens, your throat may close, your mind races or goes blank. Now, it's the same boundary, same words, completely different internal response. And why? Because what your body is responding to isn't the boundary itself. It's the anticipation of the consequences. There might be disappointment, withdrawal, anger. You might be misunderstood, being seen as too much, selfish, or being difficult. And your nervous system learned a long time ago that closeness plus honesty sometimes came at a real cost. So it protects you, not because your nervous system is weak, but because at one point, staying quiet kept you safe. The same pattern shows up with visibility. Imagining being seen is one thing. Actually being seen by people who matter to you, your family, your peers, your community, is an entirely different story. Visibility isn't threatening because you may fail. It's threatening because being seen once carried consequences. This may have meant judgment, rejection, loss of belonging, punishment for standing up for yourself or speaking up, disagreeing with other people. So again, your nervous system doesn't hear opportunity, it hears risk. That fear isn't imagined, and this isn't a mindset issue. It's a capacity issue, a nervous system capacity issue. Your body is still responding as if the old rules apply, as if you were 7 years old, even though the environment has changed dramatically. And this is where healing often reaches its limit, because insight can explain why this is happening, but it does not and cannot retrain the nervous system to respond differently when it really matters. And that's where integration begins. So if honesty feels easy in your journal, but terrifying in conversation, we don't push you to override that fear. We work there. We look at how you respond in those situations. If $5 feels neutral in your body, but $10,000 feels charged, if your nervous system is scanning for danger, disbelief, or the catch with this amount of money, we don't shame that. We work with it. If visibility feels fine with strangers, but destabilizing with people who matter to you, we look at that. We work there. Not all at once, not by force, but gradually, safety, with clear repetition. Over time, something specific changes. Your nervous system stops interpreting expansion as threat. You stop crashing after growth, and you stop negotiating with what you actually want. You stop shrinking your life to stay safe. And this is the real outcome of integration and integrating properly. Choice becomes available inside the moment. This is important, not because fear disappears, but because fear no longer is in charge and running your decisions. You stop asking, will I crash if I do this? And start knowing, if I do this, I can hold myself here. This is how survival stops being the internal authority, not by force, not through motivation, not through willpower, and not through more insight, more healing, but by teaching the body with compassion, repetition, that the danger has now passed. That's when momentum becomes reliable. That's when expansion becomes sustainable. And that's when you get excited because you can feel the life. That's when the life you want stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling livable. I want to end this conversation a little differently. Not as a teacher, not as a coach, but just as one woman recognizing another. I see you. I know how long you've been carrying this. I know how painful it is. I know how frustrating it is to be so close to the life you want and not quite living it yet. And I know how tempting it is to stay in the healing space, especially when it once saved you. But healing was never the destination. Your awakening wasn't meant to keep you turned inside or inwards forever. It was meant to call you forwards, because the world doesn't need more women who understand their pain. It needs women who have metabolized it and embodied their soul's light. We need women who can lead without force, who can create without collapse, who can hold power without losing themselves. Leadership doesn't come from inside, it comes from integration, from living a consciousness that has been forged, not theorized. And that leadership can look like many things. It might be as a mother, a creative, a CEO, a guide, a voice, or simply a grounded, embodied presence in the world. But the responsibility is the same. If you've woken up, it's because something in you is meant to move and is meant to lead. And if you have found your way here, you already know this. And this is your next step. Not because you are broken and not because healing didn't work, but because you're ready. Again, I recognize you. And if you're ready to stop living in preparation of the life you want to be living and start living it in an embodied, soul's light way, this is where that happens. This video isn't here to convince you or explain what you already understand. It's here to show you in a very practical way what this container actually does and why having the right structure and support in the phase after healing is the difference between living it, living your healing, and managing it for another year. One thing I want to name, because I see it a lot, or it's incredibly common, is that a lot of women reach this phase, the phase after healing, and unintentionally move into self-management. They know enough to keep themselves okay or feeling okay, but it requires constant effort. It requires a lot of rituals, being super careful. They've got a lot of private practices, and there's this constant need of maintenance to avoid spiraling. And at first, it feels good. It feels responsible. It feels mature. And it feels like I'm just looking after myself. But over time, something starts to happen. Your life starts getting shaped around what's easiest to manage. You become less available for real life, less available for the risks that create expansion, really insular. You become less available for the edges that actually change the shape of your identity. And sometimes spiritual language even gets used to justify this. It wasn't aligned. I'm honoring how I feel. But the truth is, if emotions are still driving your choices, your world will tend to get smaller, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because management in isolation will always be easier than living boldly in the real world. And that is what I mean by self-erosion. Okay, so a light and a dark is the container name. Integration method is the process. And the process is simple. To help your nervous system hold more, so you can make different, more informed choices in the moments where life gets loud. And you stop living in the gap between who you know you are and what you're actually able to sustain. You could call it embodiment or embodying your healing, no longer managing or maintaining it. You get to live as the healed woman. Here's what we do practically without making this overtly complex. Inside this container, we build 3 things. Safety in the body first. Because if your system, your body, doesn't feel safe, you can have all the awareness in the world and still not follow through with what you want to do. So we stabilize your nervous system. So you're not trying to create change from bracing, from survival. 2, a map for your survival patterns. We make your default survival programming predictable. Not as a judgment, but as data. So instead of getting blindsided by your reactions, so instead of getting blindsided by fear or hesitation or freeze, or the way you people please or overfunction, you can start recognizing, this is this pattern showing up. This is my edge. This is the moment my system tries to keep me in the familiar place. And number 3, we give you a repeatable method for moving beyond your edge. And this point matters. You don't just need a solution for this one time, this one moment in your life, the integration moment. You actually need a framework you can reuse for the rest of your life. Let me explain what I mean by this. Because the very nature of expansion is that you will always reach the edge of what your nervous system knows. That's literally what growth is. So we teach you how to meet that edge safely, predictably, and incrementally on a regular basis. So you don't crash and erode your self-trust again. That's what makes this work repeatable, not accidental. Functionally, we meet once a week in a live call, usually 60 to 75 minutes. Each call follows a consistent rhythm. We have nervous system stabilization, and then we go into a real world question and answer. So like real life questions like, what do I do when my body locks up in the moment? How do I hold the boundary when the consequences hit? How do I hold disappointment? What do I do in that moment where I want to run away and I need to stay? How do I stop negotiating with what I want when fear shows up? And this is where change becomes behavioral, because we work with what's happening in real life, in the moment, and not in theory. And between the calls, you have written workbooks that support the week's focus, questions and things that you need to move through, and accountability between calls. So you're not doing the hardest part of this work alone. There is support when you need it the most. When we work inside the container, I get you to choose one of the main primary areas of your life for the full 12 weeks. So you will focus on one area, like whether or not it's your relationships or money or boundaries, visibility, career. Because this isn't about becoming a different woman in theory. It's about becoming her in practice, how you embody her. And you don't do that by trying to change everything all at once. We do this by stabilizing your nervous system, stabilizing change in one area of your life until it becomes who you are, who you live from, who you default to, and then we can move to the next level or a different topic. Why you don't do this alone. Here's the part that a lot of people will underestimate. Healing is private. You can go to a retreat. You can do inner work. You can do processing, and the people around you will barely notice. They don't understand, and so they just let you do what you want to do. But integration is public. When you start setting boundaries, changing patterns, disappointing people, no longer over-functioning, this is the work that people can see, and many of them won't be thrilled. Your partner benefited from your old dynamic. Your boss liked you being endlessly capable and over-functioning. Your family may not welcome the new you. When you implement change, the world pushes back. And this is when your survival self gets loud. Having someone in your corner who is 100% dedicated to your growth, who understands the mechanics of this post-healing phase, who can hold you accountable and help you interrupt what's happening without collapsing back into old patterns. That's not a nice to have. That's what stops you from eroding yourself in isolation. Okay, what happens when you join? When you join, you'll receive an intro video and a pre-work orientation. It helps you map where you are now, what you want, what your body can currently hold, and what your focus will be for the 12 weeks of the whole container. And this sets the direction. It gives us a map to work towards. Who do you want to be? How do you want to live your life? How do you want to show up? And then we begin week 1 with clarity, not vagueness. The integration method, this container, exists to support you as you stop managing yourself and start living from the embodied version of the woman you already know you are. If this is the phase you're in, you don't need to rush this decision, but you do need to stop delaying it. The details are below the video. Read them properly. And if it's a yes, if you feel it in your body, you'll feel it quietly, clearly, and without drama.